Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Harvard Data Commons session. I'm Sonia, and I manage curation for the Harvard Dataverse and work with the Dataverse team at IQSS. Today, we have Andrew Woods from Harvard University. He is the manager of library software engineering at Harvard, and he is going to be speaking to us about one of the objectives of the Harvard Data Commons project, which is the Dataverse and Dash, which is the digital access to scholarship at Harvard system. It provides researchers a way to share data and publications, that's Dash, and to indicate the relationship between them. Until now, these systems have been independent, requiring researchers to enter duplicate information, but the Harvard Data Commons project, they've developed a confederation of open access repositories, notified linked data notification-based mechanisms, and that is what, to bring these two systems together, and that is what Andrew is going to be speaking on today. It is all yours, Andrew.
Okay, well, it seems like you kind of covered it, Sonia, but
no, I tried not to.
I can add some detail, and I assume I can go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Awesome. All right, there it is. And thanks, I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate having the opportunity. I will add to what Sonia said there, that yes, I will be talking about the integration between Dataverse and our open access repository, Dash, which is based on DSpace. But also, I like to consider this session kind of like a 2-for-1, because there have been a couple of sessions already, and then there's another session later today talking about various aspects of Harvard Data Commons. But also using this opportunity in this session to give a general overview of the Harvard Data Commons initiative and tying those threads and those themes together. So it's this session. Well, we'll start out with the general overview of Harvard Data Commons, and then the second part is diving into one aspect of Harvard Data Commons related to Dataverse and our open access repository. And I will note that if anyone wants to follow along with the slides, the link to these slides right here are on this page. It's that bit.ly link, the Dataverse, yeah, you see it there. So feel free to grab the slides if you like. All right. So the first course, first part of this session is, like I said, just a general overview, and the vision for Harvard Data Commons is articulated here, and I'll just read it quickly, which is to improve the researcher experience by automating the flow of research data from research computing environments into management, publication, discovery, and preservation environment. So basically just facilitating the workflows that researchers have, getting their content, and that content can take the form of data sets, that content can take the form of computational workflows or even articles and preprints from the researcher environment into these other environments that have management and facilitate publication, discovery, preservation, etc. So that's the top level vision and objective of Harvard Data Commons, and I believe this is a shared problem space, and I'm hoping that we can use this session to and I encourage you to be framing your thinking about what we're talking about here when I'm talking about over the next so many minutes. Just let's use it as a shared opportunity to explore the problem space. And I'm sure with Dataverse or with other systems and different processes, you're addressing this problem at your own institution. But what I'll be talking through here is how the Harvard Data Commons, the perspective it has taken, and the approaches it is engaged in for trying to achieve this vision. So derived directly from that vision, there are some specific questions that we are trying to create solutions for. For example, how do we support the preservation and management of large data sets? Likewise, how do we support reproducible science, and how do we increasingly support open science more generally? And also, how do we facilitate the discovery of articles and their associated data sets? And then, like, altogether, how do we answer those questions? How do we provide tooling and support for all those things in a way that, from the researcher perspective, doesn't actually bring increased overhead and seamlessly works within existing processes? So before Harvard Data Commons, and this is just sort of a cartoon picture, so it's not exactly right, but before Harvard Data Commons, this is roughly the situation that we have been in, where a researcher has workflows that facilitate actually doing the work. There are data sets that are, by and large, deposited into our data repository, Dataverse. There are articles or preprints that are published into our open access repository, DSpace. It's a DSpace system, but branded as Dash, as Sonia mentioned. And then there is a preservation repository, but it hasn't really been in the mix here. So this is the state that we were starting from. Now, with Harvard Data Commons, this is the solution that we have implemented over the last year, and with like the objective of creating an integrated ecosystem of services. And it's worth noting that really Dataverse has been central to this ecosystem. And I'll just walk through here briefly. There are 3/4, and I'll say 4 from now on. 4 objectives. I say 3/4 because the third objective is actually split into 2 parts. But so there are 4 objectives related to top-level objectives related to Harvard Data Commons. One is facilitating the deposit of computational workflows into Dataverse. The other is opening the door more broadly to diverse and larger data sets into Dataverse. And then thirdly, creating an integration and cross-linking between content that's in the open access repository and data sets in Dataverse. So this blue arrow connecting Dataverse and the open access repository. And then fourthly, creating pathways for content in Dataverse where deemed appropriate to flow into the university's long-term digital preservation repository. So there are some question marks here related to the timeline still, but I just wanted to kind of frame the work that has happened and where we are going with Harvard Data Commons. So this project, and roughly represented in the diagram that I just showed, has been implemented over the past year. So we had a pilot project defined across those different objectives that started last summer and actually is finishing at the end of this month right now. Then, based on this MVP, based on this pilot project, we're taking a step back and doing some assessment, doing some analysis, working with stakeholders, and defining the strategic direction for how we want to implement sort of the next phase or next evolution of what we have prototyped. And so I don't know if it goes into the fall or if it goes into the winter, but not too far out, that planning will have taken place, that strategy has been defined, and then we will move into phase 2. So general timeline there. And so now I will walk through the 4 top-level objectives that are defining the solution for the vision mentioned earlier. And let me see, I don't know, I don't have the participants who is actually on the line right now. I don't know if Jim or Mahmood are here or not, but if so, I will be invoking you for your input in a moment if you are around, but stay tuned. So the first objective is generally, like I said before, trying to open the doors more broadly to different types and larger data sets coming into Dataverse. And making sure that those data sets have the qualities within Dataverse that support open scholarship. So specifically, the use case is, as a researcher, I want to publish a data set from a research computing environment to a repository that has characteristics that are important for open scholarship. And this objective and this topic was discussed yesterday by Jim at the 2 o'clock session. And yeah, I don't know if you, okay, Jim, I see you are on the line. Thank you. I appreciate that. Would you be interested in coming off mic, Jim, if there's anything you want to just highlight in terms of this top level objective?
I'm trying to add him, but I think that Dwayne might have to do it.
Oh, well, if it's.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, not a lot. I think there is a repeat of this. What is it, tomorrow? In the morning. I don't have the time, so you can't see it live again. Basically, this talk is sort of highlighting the current state of large data support in Dataverse, and then talking about how we're using both Globus as a transfer mechanism to go even larger, and then how beyond that we're going to have what we've been talking about for the last couple of years, the ability to reference data at a remote site without transferring it, sort of for the largest data set. So if you've got a petabyte data set, you don't ever want to move it to Dataverse, but you'd like to have a data set that points to it.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. So there are 4 top level objectives. And so the second one with Harvard Data Commons is the use case is, as a researcher, I want to publish computational workflows to a repository that has these same characteristics as the first objective. My take on this is ultimately with the computational workflows and eventually being actionable workflows in Dataverse, just further facilitating reproducible science. And I see Mahmood, you're here as well, and there was a session earlier where you talked in detail about this, but likewise, I didn't know if you wanted to just highlight anything.
Sure. Yeah. So we as you are showing here, I had a presentation in the last session, curation and workflow session, where I showed the progress of the team. We defined a set of features for, as Andrew mentioned, for our MVP phase, helping to onboard researchers to upload their computational workflow. We added few metadata terms to describe them, and also added 4 examples of computational workflow in different by different languages and tools to help researchers define the computational workflow and upload them. And these have been in MATLAB, Jupyter Notebook, R Notebook, and in a standard one, common workflow language. And the slides are available in the Google Drive. I think Sonia already shared the Google Drive. few times in case if you want to review the progress for that task. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mahmoud. And so the third objective, or the first part of the third objective, is really to facilitate the long-term digital preservation of content that is in Dataverse. And so the use case being, as a Harvard-based researcher, I'd like to deposit the data deposited into Dataverse to be exported to and preserved in the university's digital preservation repository. And there is a session later today, so I won't go into much additional detail here and now, but there is a session where we, when I say we, I mean Jim, will be going into more detail on this integration with the preservation repository. And then the fourth objective with Harvard Data Commons and associated use case is this integration between the data repository and the open access repository. The use case being, as a Harvard researcher, I would like for the publication and data sets that I publish to be cross-linked. And the motivation here really is sort of in order to increase discoverability of both things, right? So if I come in through the open access repository and find an article, facilitate the discoverability of the supporting data sets. And likewise, if I come across the data set, there will be links in the metadata associated with the data set that reference the articles that talk about the findings based on that data set. So discoverability for the researchers also, we're motivated to increase awareness of these systems. So in the case that the researchers don't currently use either Dataverse or Dash, this cross-linking facilitates awareness of the systems. And then just generally speaking, with most of these objectives, further supporting open science, transparency of the underlying data that supports articles, and then the reproducibility of the science by actually having access to the source content. So that's the Harvard Data Commons in a nutshell. And just a kind of a quick passover of the top level vision and the work and the objectives that are feeding into supporting that vision. I will go into a little bit more detail in that last use case, and the last scenario of cross-linking between articles and data sets. And I'll just briefly share this concept of core notify, which is the mechanism for integrating the Dataverse effectively and DSpace, or our open access repository. And so already researchers oftentimes submit articles into Dash, which is our DSpace installation, and likewise they commonly publish data sets in Dataverse. But the thing that's been missing is the integration between the two, and Core Notify is what enables, or is the underlying technology that has enabled this integration. And so Notify is kind of like just a brand, really, or a name for an initiative that has come out of the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, which is a group that defines practices and recommendations that support the mission of open access, generally speaking. The Notify initiative is really a protocol that has been specified that uses and leverages linked data notifications. And linked data notifications, if you have the slides, are linked off there, are a W3C recommendation for systems to, as the name implies, send notifications based on various events. So what we've done is we have built in these notification capabilities using Core Notify and linked data notifications. We've built that capability into both Dataverse and into Dash, and done it in such a way that those updates are being pushed into the upstream community projects. So the integration that we have here is and will be available to the broader community who wants to replicate a similar integration. Just as a side note, I will also mention that in the context of the open access repository DSpace here, having implemented Notify, it opens the door for other very interesting use cases, which are in direct support of these larger goals around open science, specifically by implementing Core Notify. Now through the open access repository, we have the option and the opportunity to integrate with overlay journals. So this notion of having online journals that source articles from open access repositories. Core Notify enables that. And then as a part of that, Core Notify also defines mechanisms, and there are other systems that integrate with DSpace, for example, for open peer review. So just sort of noting that that is a possibility by having implemented this. So drilling in a little bit more deeply, by using the Core Notify protocol with linked data notifications, we do now enable the semi-automated cross-linking of articles in Dash or DSpace with the associated data sets in Dataverse. And so ultimately, what that results in is the cross-linking that you see here. So now in both cases, if a preprint or an article is submitted into DSpace, and it's submitted with the DOI of a Dataverse dataset, a message will be sent to Dataverse to establish the cross-link. And then likewise on the flip side, if a dataset is published in Dataverse with a link to the Dash article, then a message will be sent to Dash, which then facilitates the cross-linking. And it's Core Notify that that sort of mediates that interaction. And as I mentioned before, the objective generally being is increased discoverability of both the articles and the associated data sets and supporting reproducible and open science. So maybe enough chit chat. What I have here is a demo. It's a short demo that I wanted to play that that actually shows how the integration works actually in practice. And hopefully, and maybe we can just do a little bit of a test here. Sonia, I'll count on you to let me know if the audio from this comes through or not. Yep.
Be a brief demonstration of linking DSpace items with.
Does that come through okay?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So it's just 4 minutes and 56 seconds long.
Dataverse dataset using Core Notify LDN messages. I'm going to start by establishing a link to an existing data set with a newly deposited item in DSpace. Do this during the item submission. I will have to retrieve the DOI of the data set. I will grab that from here. And that will be placed in the research data input field, which can have multiples.
So I'm just pausing for a second. I'm going to make it full screen. Is it still sharing? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, thanks.
Deposit, it should send a notification to Dataverse. We can see that research data UI is rendered in the item view. Over here, we have the notification of the announcement of a release. And the link here should be an NRS link, which will resolve back to the item in DSpace. All right. Okay, now I will do the inverse, in which I will associate this data set with a item in DSpace. To do so, I'm going to edit citation here and grab an existing item in DSpace. We'll be using the NRS URI here. Place that here. Remember to select the -NRS while doing this. This will save the changes as draft, and we'll need to publish the data set. And upon publish, it will send a notification to DSpace. Okay. Over here, we'll see that it's been published. And over here, on refresh of the full detail view, we should see a core notify metadata entry. We have that here. And the DOI will not resolve back as it's a fake DOI at the time, but we can confirm that the DOI matches that of the data set. So copy this here. Go to this here, and it matches. And we can also then do the next step, which would be for the DSpace manager to come in and add this as a DC data URI. We'll go ahead and do that. And this should not send a notification as it's already been established a link from the Dataverse side. So I'll save that. And now this item has its research data. And the data set on the side has its link to there as metadata here. And we can show that no new notifications have been sent. And one last test will be to test an update of an item. So what I'll do here is I will edit this existing item, removing both the core notify and the data URI and saving it. Then we'll get here. So edit it as the manager now wants to update an existing item with a DOI from the data set. So we'll go back over here and grab DOI here. That link, edit, data DOI. And now that it does not have the core notify metadata, it should send a notification on update. Here. There's a new notification of the existing test item, and that should itself resolve back to the existing item in DSpace. And that concludes the demonstration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William.
All right.
Let me get back into presentation mode here.
All right. This will be a brief demonstration of.
Yeah, and so maybe just this is my last slide here, and so we can talk about the demo or anything else that has come up here. But maybe just in summary, you know, I think one of the reasons that myself and generally speaking, I think we're so excited about Harvard Data Commons and the central work of Dataverse in that context is that it represents alignment around the shared objective around supporting streamlined open science. And that happens to be an objective which follows directly from the principles in the Harvard Library's vision document, which is also linked off here, this advancing open knowledge, which is to invest in open access infrastructure and services that support equitable, sustainable models for scholarly communication and open knowledge. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I've been delighted to work with the Dataverse community, to work with the DSpace community, work with CORE, and all the various other tools and initiatives to together collectively work towards realizing the broader vision. So, thank you. So it seems like we probably have time for discussion or questions or reflections or comments or anything that anyone else wants to add. And in terms of acknowledgements, I don't have a list of folks who are on the line right now, but the Harvard Data Commons has been a huge initiative involving a lot of folks. I think many are on the line here. I wish I could see who you are so I could thank you individually, but in the absence of that, thank you all.
Andrew, can I throw in one other thing that might be useful for the community? And I'll
Please do.
I'll steal your screen for just a half a second. One part that was in this that isn't directly related to the messaging is because at Harvard, when we deploy this, right, Harvard's Dataverse is open to the world, and only some collections really have Harvard researchers where this idea of a Dash connection makes sense. One of the things that we implemented as part of this was to make the ability to have custom instructions in templates. So the screen share I'm showing there is just that on the related publication field, you can now set a template that says something useful like, this one, if you can't read it, it just says, be sure to include a link to any paper you have in Dash and we'll create the backlink for you. Right, so that only shows up for people using that template, so it can be set up with collections and so on. And there's an edit mechanism I won't show that allows template creators to add those kinds of messages. So I think that was useful here, but you may find lots of other uses where you want to put custom instructions in a template that explains to people how you expect them to fill out given fields, and we haven't had that before. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And as the implementer, Jim, on the Dataverse side, didn't know if you wanted to address Philip's question in chat.
So there's a couple of things here that are going on. So that related publications field, we really have sort of two sub use cases. One, the direct one is Dash's preprint repository, right? And again, I'll caricature it because I don't know all of Dash, but in essence, it could be a preprint where there isn't necessarily a publication, and so the demo was basically showing that you can point to the identifier of the preprint directly and make that link. The other use case we have is that the preprint is actually associated with a DOI of a real publication out in some journal somewhere. And in that case, in Dataverse, you could put the DOI in. We're still going to send the message to Dash. And that's kind of why it's semi-manual or semi-automated right now, is that when that DOI shows up over in Dash, they can decide, hey, we've got an associated preprint that also, right, Dataverse is pointing to the real paper, but the paper is associated with a preprint in Dash, so Dash will make the backlink to Dataverse. So we'll essentially have a triangle relationship. So we may need to, we may want in those templates that I just showed have a more complex instruction that says if you've got a real paper, use the DOI, and if you just have a preprint in Dash, put that in here as well, something like that.
Yeah, and I see here scrolling up a little bit in the chat, Dorothea, you have a question around, it sounds like you have a similar setup, or, meaning that you have a Dataverse and you have a DSpace, and you're interested in the possibility of the integration, but just like what's actually happening here. And so maybe in, like in some ways it's quite simple what's happening here. And it is, if content comes into DSpace, for example, and as a part of the metadata, either at submission, initial submission, or subsequently, when updating an item in DSpace, if you add a DOI to a Dataverse data set in DSpace, the tooling that has been built in DSpace will send a message to the configured Dataverse. And then on the Dataverse side, it will catch that message and create the link, or create the opportunity for the link going back to DSpace to be established in the metadata of the Dataverse dataset. And then the exact same thing on the other side. If the link, if you come in from the Dataverse side and add metadata that links to an article in DSpace, that when you click publish on the Dataverse side, a message gets sent to DSpace, and the opportunity is created to establish that cross-link.
This is something that we have it as semi-automated right now, but both because it's the minimum viable product to get something out, but also because we thought admins might want to review. Right, just because somebody put in a DOI doesn't necessarily mean that's a real thing, right? We don't expect fraud per se, but if somebody made a typo, right, we want to make sure that the link makes sense. And so what that does on the Dataverse side in particular is when a message comes in, all that's being automated is the admins for that collection getting a notification. And then the workflow from there is basically, once the admin can click and go to that data set, they can go see the dash entry. And if they think the link should be made, they can enter the related publication information. And the idea is that an admin, in this case, since it's not a scientific update, doesn't require a new version, that they could use the update current version functionality and basically just push that additional metadata into the current version of the data set. So there's not a lot of magic on the Dataverse side in terms of we're just reusing the existing ability for an admin to edit the data set once they receive the notification.
Yeah, and I'm sort of looking at the chat here also. It looks like Christina, I think the short answer is absolutely. There's nothing special about the types of DSpace items that impact this. So any DSpace item, you should be able to use this tooling and workflow to cross-link with the data sets in Dataverse. And then it looks like there's a comment here, which I appreciate, which is maybe this could be what we demonstrated in the tooling that we've put in place in the Harvard Data Commons context could further be augmented by a lookup service, so that those initial links don't have to be pasted in manually, but can be discovered in a more automated fashion, which I don't know if that code is or sort of that lookup mechanism is documented or available somewhere, but that seems like that could be pretty useful.
Yeah, the general mechanism in Dataverse is our external vocab mechanism, and then basically a JavaScript has to be written to go bounce off of whatever service. So I would, assuming that Dash is just sort of vanilla DSpace at the API level, it could be a DSpace related JavaScript, and if that's what they have at KU Leuven, then we should be good. If it's not, somebody has to write one for Dataverse or for DSpace in general, and then we can use it.
All right, any closing comments or reflections, or anyone else who's been involved in the project? Is there something you think might be helpful to highlight? I'm not hearing anything. Hopefully it's not because you can't find the unmute button.
They can raise their hand if they want to, and we can unmute them if they need, but I think everybody's good. That was a great session.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad to be able to participate here.